bringing you the biggest stories from Israel and the Middle East. I'm Emily Schrader. It's 2 p.m. here in Israel, and today is day 649 of the war in Gaza. Let's get into all the top headlines this hour. First off, we begin the hour with a look at Syria. The IDF is conducting strikes on the Syrian regime targets in Damascus this afternoon, including at the entrance of the Syrian military headquarters. On the northern border, dozens of Syrian Druze have attempted to breach the border to the Israeli side, fleeing massacres. This follows strikes overnight amid ongoing violence in the Druze area of Suwaida in southern Syria. Syrian leaders have responded with condemnation of Israeli attacks after Israel's statement that they will protect the Druze community. Overnight, the IDF conducted a string of attacks and airstrikes in Syria following the violent attacks on the Druze minority by Bedouin Arabs. 248 have been reported killed as clashes continued overnight. Prime Minister Netanyahu stated Israel will continue supporting the Druze community, and just this morning, Defense Minister Katz reiterated that the IDF will continue attacking Al-Jolani's forces in defense of the Druze community. Katz added that the IDF will continue attacking until the rogue Syrian forces withdraw from the border area. And now let's turn to our ILTV military correspondent, David Matlin, for a further update on the situation. David, what can you tell us about what's going on that Syrian border?
To be honest, it's pretty wild what's going on right now on the Syrian front and with this entire situation. I mean, you mentioned some of the major details that occurred overnight. But there have been reports, as the day broke today, that the United States had essentially entered the mix here and told Israel to stand down and don't get involved anymore in this. We've heard all the heated words and comments, condemnations coming from Damascus. Obviously, this has ramped up incredibly since yesterday, when they were still referring yesterday to
I think we might have lost you for a second there, David. Are you still with us? Looks like we lost him. We'll try to circle back to David to get more of an update on the situation in Syria. As he mentioned, it is a rapidly developing situation. As we speak, the IDF is conducting activities in Syria, and that northern border is seeing activity. Do we have Radwan with us? I would like to welcome Radwan Osman, Syrian activist. I'm not sure if we have her yet. We've been waiting to see if she can connect. And it looks like we don't have that either. All right, we'll circle back to that later. Well, moving on to the Gaza Strip, we do have an ongoing security situation in Gaza. The IDF is ramping up pressure on Hamas. So currently, the IDF is intensifying the strikes on Hamas targets inside of the Gaza Strip in order to pressure Hamas on the ongoing ceasefire and hostage negotiations. What we're seeing now is the IDF conducting maneuvers designed to complete the destruction of Hamas. The IDF said troops dismantled an explosive site, launchers, and tunnel routes in Beit Hanoun, where 5 different divisions are said to be operating. Now, troops from the Givati Brigade eliminated dozens of terrorists at close range and dismantled terror infrastructure, including weapons and underground tunnel routes, in coordinating with the combat engineers. In addition to cooperation with combat engineering units, troops on the ground are in constant contact with Israeli fighter jets ready to drop bombs on any terror infrastructure. Loud booms were also heard overhead this morning in Israeli communities in southern Israel. Let's turn back to our correspondent, David. Hopefully we've corrected these technical difficulties. David, are you with us? Looks like we're still not quite connected on that. We'll try to circle back to you, David. Sorry about that. Moving on to the next story in Gaza, we have the aid distribution in the Gaza Strip, an ongoing challenge for the state of Israel and, of course, for the Palestinians inside the Gaza Strip as well. Now, we are still seeing casualties and chaos at these sites. The U.S. and Israel-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has said that 20 Palestinians were killed this morning in a chaotic stampede at one of the aid distribution sites in Khan Yunis. Now, the GHF stated they believe armed agitators were sent to the distribution locations by Hamas for sparking these type of chaotic incidents, including the one we saw today. Now, this follows weeks of blatant death threats by Hamas against GHF employees and workers. At least 12 Palestinian GHF workers have been killed by Hamas and 2 American citizens injured. Now, despite the incident, GHF has successfully delivered over 70 million meals to Gaza civilians. And now in Lebanon, Israeli strikes targeted elite Radwan forces of Hezbollah that were detected operating in southern Lebanon in blatant violation of the November ceasefire. The strikes were conducted deep inside Lebanon, with Lebanese state media reporting that 12 people have been killed. The army says the strikes were aimed at military facilities belonging to Hezbollah. This in order to prevent the Radwan forces from rebuilding strength after the terror group suffered serious blows at the hands of the IDF. And more diplomatic moves are underway as U.S. President Donald Trump is set to host the Qatari Prime Minister tonight in the White House amid continuing White House efforts to broker a Gaza truce. Trump will meet Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, and Trump has expressed optimism that a hostage deal could be imminent. But talks have been stalled in recent days over the issue of the scope of the IDF withdrawal from Gaza. Meanwhile, Israelis took to the streets once again to protest for the return of all the hostages, pressuring Netanyahu and President Trump to do more to secure a deal. 50 hostages remain in Gaza, 20 of which are presumed to be alive and suffering greatly in Hamas captivity. Now, joining us to discuss the diplomatic situation in the Middle East is the Middle East expert and editor-in-chief of Middle East 24, a new Middle East news platform, Dan Fefferman. Dan, thank you for being with us today. We seem to be at an impasse on the hostage talks so far, though President Trump is determined to push forward. What are the main obstacles that we see to a hostage deal, and are they resolvable?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'll start with the last question first, and then I'll come back to the kind of main points. We're seeing, there's a lot of optimism just up until last week that we were on the verge of some kind of ceasefire deal that would lead to something more permanent. A lot of urgency and pressure in both Washington and in the Gulf countries, in Riyadh and Doha, in order to end this. I think everybody outside of the Middle East and kind of on the outreaches of the region is really insistent on wrapping this up. And it seemed that there was also a clear interest coming from Netanyahu himself. If you looked at his messaging, if you looked at what came out of, the messaging that came out of the Washington trip, that it was time to wrap up this war. And a lot of military officials saying there's not much more to be gained operationally or strategically from having this presence on the ground. So critics are saying, both critics in Israel, the famous Ronen Bergman piece that came out in the New York Times, but critics in Washington, critics in the Arab world are saying Netanyahu is dragging this war out. With some have thrown the date out as July 27th, when the Knesset goes into recess, in order to make it harder to bring down the Knesset at this time and go into new elections. If we ignore those and if we look at the actual sticking points, there still are a few points between the Hamas side and between the Israeli side. They have to do with the extent of the Israeli withdrawal during the 60-day ceasefire period, as in what kind of buffer zone is going to be left. It has to do with if Israel will retain presence and control on the Rafah border with Egypt, something that Egypt is actually behind the scenes. I'm getting a word from my Egyptian contacts and press sources that on the Egyptian side, they're pressuring Hamas to hold firm on that because Egypt doesn't want to leave that in Israeli or Hamas control. It has to do with the timing of the hostage release versus the withdrawal, which one comes first. And of course, the aid coordination mechanisms, the GHF versus returning the UN mechanisms that Hamas was a lot more comfortable with. And so those seem to still be on the table. I think with enough pressure from Washington, and I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the Trump meeting with the Qatari Prime Minister. Even if we don't get the full press statement, I think we're going to get something is going to come out of that, and we'll see renewed pressure both on the Israeli side and on the Hamas side.
Now, I want to ask you about Syria. We see a tremendous amount of instability, violence on the ground from, Al-Jolani's forces against the Druze community specifically. What is the next step in Syria? I mean, last week we were speaking about the Abraham Accords, and now they're committing another massacre. What's happening in Syria?
Yeah, this tragedy that's unfolding in Soweto, and by the way, we're giving live coverage, including on the ground footage from our sources in Soweto, so people can follow that on our X account. It really is quite tragic, and it seems to be, from everything I can put together, the Druze really falling victim to a regional chess match, or as one of a Syrian analyst put me, sort of kind of a World Cup of regional and global intelligence operations taking place on Syrian soil, and the Druze are really the victims of it. What we're seeing here, it seems to be Al-Shara, the former Al-Jolani Al-Shara, looking to sacrifice basically the Druze in order to give an excuse for the Syrian military to come back into the Soweto area and take control. And so these Islamist tribal forces, these Islamist militant forces, basically staged these very violent attacks, which are reminiscent to some extent, and maybe that's why they're resonating with us here in Israel, of the October 7th attacks, and the Israeli Druze are speaking of it as a sort of their own October 7th now, in order to give the military an excuse to come in and take control. First of all, it's clear that the violence against the residents of Soweto, against the Druze, needs to end. It's clear that the Druze need to be protected. I think Israel needs to be a lot more careful in how it employs force, and it needs to do this in a lot more coordination with the American and the British intelligence forces, but also with the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Qataris here. And it's not clear that we're in line with some kind of regional strategy that is being played out, again, at the expense of the Druze of Syria. The playbook for the Druze after the violence subsides, I think, will have to be to look at what the Kurds, the SDF forces in Syria, are doing. And it looks like al-Shara's long game strategy is how to incorporate all of these disparate elements of Syria in which he does not yet have control, to bring them under control. And again, once again, the unfortunate victims of this are the Druze. And so protect them first, and then see if there's a way to play along with al-Shara's regional strategy here.
Well, we'll be following that closely, of course, and providing updates as well. I want to ask you something a little bit more broad that's been on the minds of many, I think, Israelis and people all around the world when it comes to Gaza. I mean, we hear about a lot of casualties, and Israel faces a lot of criticism over mistakes made in battle that have led to the death of innocents. Can you explain why we see some of these incidents? Are they unique to the war that Israel is facing? And is the scale of bloodshed as bad as some of Israel's detractors are claiming when it comes to the conflict in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And it's a tough one. Whenever you're talking about situations of war, especially in urban areas, you're going to have, first of all, a lot of mistakes. You're talking about human error. You're talking about real people who have to man the intelligence, who have to man the sniper or the machine gun positions, or the tanks or the artillery positions. Second of all, war, people who have never been in war don't realize to the extent to which it is what we call the fog of war. There is a lot going on at once. It is absolutely chaotic, and it's really hard to always have a grasp of what needs to be done, making split-second decisions, often under fire. What I would assume to be, and just from everything I've seen, the extent of the casualty, the civilian casualties, the mistakes that are being made here are not any more significant than in any other war in urban warfare history, or in similar geographic or population density scenarios. The difference we're seeing is that international focus, especially social media, is so hyper-focused on every aspect and inch of this war. And add to that is you do have elements on the ground in Hamas who are trying to exploit whether real incidents, tragic incidents like what happened earlier this week, in which 10 civilians were killed accidentally at a watering station, but also staged incidents. And this morning, what we see is the trampling and a loss of about 20 people, or as the GHF is saying, 12 people, seems to have been instigated by Hamas. And so you have staged incidents, you have fake incidents that are being orchestrated, you have real incidents that are coming out of mistakes. What needs to be done here is that the IDF, and I'm sure it's doing this as just part of its general operational protocol of learning from mistakes, needs to be extra cautious. Soldiers are tired, there's fatigue, There's also a desensitivity that takes place over 600 plus days of war. But soldiers need to be kind of refreshed in their sensitivity to loss of civilian life. The IDF needs to absolutely make sure that no soldiers are purposefully targeting civilians. That's often the accusation. Hard for me to believe that that's what's happening, but it always can happen, and we need to make sure that that's what's not happening. And of course, on the media and social media side of things, I think the IDF spokesperson and the government spokespeople need to be a lot more clear that we're operating in very difficult circumstances. Mistakes do happen, but this war is getting far more scrutiny than any war in history. And unfortunately, once again, civilians do pay the price, and that is oftentimes the sad and tragic cost of warfare.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you providing some insight as to the situation on the ground, both in Syria and in the Gaza Strip. Thank you for joining us today, Dan Fefferman.
Thanks for having me.
All right, now we are going to try to circle back to our military correspondent, David Matlin, for the Gaza updates as well as what's happening on the ground in Syria. David, what can you tell us first and foremost about Syria?
Yeah, I'm not sure where I got lost in the last broadcast, but last attempt. But absolutely, right now in Syria, just in the last hour, there are fresh airstrikes being reported outside Soweto, Israeli airstrikes. And you mentioned earlier the attack in Damascus that symbolically, we'll find out exactly, maybe more than symbolically, hit the entrance to military headquarters there and intelligence. So ongoing right now, there are strikes taking place as we're speaking. And again, people piling up at the borders on both sides right now. Druze, as far as we could tell, mostly Druze individuals and family members across borders here. I mean, this is generally a pretty open area, actually, for the Druze across this section of the Golan Heights. A surprising number of people traverse it every day, even in the tensest times during the civil war, during the Assad regime. The Druze have a special status there, bridging the border as they do. So generally they go through. They're used to this. These are people who are familiar with this area. But today, with the sensitivities of the battles taking place in Soweto, the IDF's been locking down, trying to maintain order there and keep people from flooding into Syria or vice versa, flooding into Israel. So that's the current situation up there right now. Fighting still ongoing as far as we can tell. Casualties still being taken up there around Soweto. Soweto being the epicenter of where this fighting is taking place. A fairly large city, one of the predominantly Druze area, and historically, again, a major bastion of support for the Assad regime. So all these factors coming together right now. But for now, no signs of slowing up. Israel has been striking, again, this last hour outside Soweto.
Now, we have heard comments from both the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister, as well as additional Israeli officials in solidarity with the Syrian Druze community coming under attack. Also, explicit warnings being issued to Al-Jolani and his forces. What do we know about the Israeli side? I mean, we expect these strikes to continue for the foreseeable future, at least. Do we have any updates in terms of the Israeli side?
In terms of what the Israeli intentions, but from the top down here, from the Prime Minister, Defense Minister, they've been fairly unequivocal that we're doing this in defense of our Druze brethren. I'm sure paraphrasing their words here. These are, our kin. We're doing this for in the spirit of our countrymen who are very concerned and who have an affinity. And they've gone as far as saying that they have issued clear warnings to the regime of Damascus. They were telling them ahead of time, don't send your forces down into this area. We're going to protect the Druze. So that message was sort of broadcast already up front. So at this point, and again, with the mounting pressure inside Israel, we're seeing the Druze of the country inside Israel really taking to the streets over this, taking to the border over this. So for now, signs in terms of rhetoric or activity that Israel is going to back off this sort of red line and pledge to stand up in defense of the Druze, who, by all accounts, from what we can tell, have really been under attack and under pressure from security forces coming down from Damascus and other parts of the country, flowing in from Aleppo, other cities who are just setting people down on trucks at this point.
All right. And regarding the Gaza front, we have seen, of course, the IDF intensifying pressure on Hamas on the ground inside Gaza, despite the fact that we see ongoing hostage and ceasefire negotiations. Do you have an update for us about the military situation in Gaza and what the objective is for at least today when it comes to the Gaza war?
Look, just announced this morning. Was this new security corridor. The IDF's been creating these east-west corridors through the Gaza Strip, carving it up in a way, trying to just gain more territorial control and operational ability for the IDF. These are supply routes. These are troop insertion points. So just established, or it's been announced, I should say, just today. The work on this corridor obviously has been going on for weeks at this point, if not longer, but announced the establishment of another corridor that sort of bisects Khan Yunis to the south of the Gaza Strip, a major urban center. There were still a surprising amount of urban territory that you could look at and not know that there was a war there. In other words, virtually untouched to a lot of these urban centers. So the IDF, again, showing that they're making new inroads on the ground, new realities, new features on the ground, I should say here, that show no sign of sort of leaving tomorrow, so to say, or anytime soon. So at this point, we know that 5 divisions are still deployed inside Gaza. They've established yet another security corridor through the Strip, and I'm talking to sources that tell me there are more battalions on the way this week, next week. The plans are in place to sort of continue the operation, ramp things up. From the IDF's perspective, ceasefire talks essentially aren't happening. That may come down and change orders and change plans, but at this point it's full steam ahead, and they're really going after Hamas everywhere they are, finding a lot of resistance in these areas, and uncovering still an incredible thing to still this far into the war be uncovering these massive tunnel complexes running underneath the cities. It's astounding, but there's so much still being discovered by the IDF.
Well, it is certainly remarkable that we're still seeing this massive scale of terror tunnels that exist underground in Gaza instead of investing those resources in the people of Gaza. I want to welcome our ILTV correspondent, Shosh Bedrosian, joining us on this panel. I want to move back to Syria. Shosh, I know that you have been in touch with some of the Druze community, and we've also seen the shocking footage from what's happening on the ground in Syria just in the last 24 hours. And of course, just a number of hours ago, we saw footage coming from the border of Israel where we saw Israeli Druze attempting to cross into Syria to assist them, and we saw Syrian Druze attempting to cross into Israel. What's going on that you're hearing from your sources, Shosh?
Sure. Look at the video on your screen right now. These are just really powerful videos that started to come out about an hour ago, Emily, of people just wanting to cross this border. The reason, and people probably are asking, why would Israeli Druze be wanting to cross this fortified border between Israel and Syria right now? And the answer is because Druze are so interconnected with one another. In fact, many of the people that are on the Israeli side that are Druze, and specifically in the Majdal Shams area, they are related to many of these Druze that live on the other side of the border here. You can see them running. That's the backdrop of Majdal Shams. There's this one road that takes you into the other side. And we know that there's one of the villages on the Syrian side called Hadar is where some of these Syrians are also attempting to cross the Israeli side. This community is one of the strongest in the whole region. They're also a very underestimated group of people in the region, but not here in Israel. Of course, they have incredible roles, whether it's in the military or in society here in Israel. But the Druze really believe that they can be the key to peace in the Middle East. They will tell you that in any community that you step foot into here in Israel. And so the power of them wanting to support their brothers, their sisters, their family, their true family on the other side of where these violent clashes are happening against the Druze community inside of Syria. It's a strong motion, but it's also just a testament of who these people are. Emily, I also want to speak about some of the other images we've seen coming out the last few days leading up to this moment that we are seeing unfold right now. Specifically, there's been horrifying videos that have come out of Druze leaders in Sweda, which is in southern Syria, actually having their traditional mustaches and beards cut off by forces. A lot of Israeli Druze have been calling this ethnic cleansing, seeing it very similar to actually the Holocaust and what Jews experienced, because they see their religious symbols, their religious leaders, and what they believe in being taken away by these forces. After this new regime came into power in Syria, there has been a sharp increase of attacks against the Druze community, a small minority group there. But we will continue to follow all of this as it unfolds, Emily.
Now, Shosh, I want to change gears a little bit and ask you about the diplomatic situation that we're seeing in Washington and the attempts at a ceasefire, the hostage negotiations. And we see that President Trump today will be having a dinner at the White House with the Qatari prime minister as these talks are ongoing. Yet, as our guest earlier, Dan Fefferman, mentioned, the IDF is operating as if there isn't any change for the current situation. What are you hearing regarding the hostage for ceasefire negotiations? Is there any update? Is there any progress on that front to bring some of these hostages home?
So a source actually told ILTV's partner Ynet just yesterday that it seems as if there are positive movements, right? But there hasn't been a large breakthrough yet. We know that Israel has been working to be very flexible, specifically with the IDF maps of what this could look like in terms of deployment while a 60-day ceasefire could happen if Hamas would finally agree to a deal that would not only release the hostages, but it would also, free up these Palestinians who have been suffering at the hands of this terror group for almost 2 years at this point. But I still think that we're at a point of a standstill, but these talks are still ongoing. I think it's important for us to look back on recent reporting that when there isn't signs of progress, Emily, these negotiating teams from Israel will go back to Israel. But the fact that they are still in Doha is obviously a very good sign. We know that, and I think it's a telltale sign for many people, analysts in this region that have been covering and following the ceasefire updates, is that anytime Steve Witkoff might be going to Doha, it could be, a step in the right direction. It could be getting this deal over the finish line. And so I think everyone's just waiting to hear an announcement that Steve Witkoff could be off. But like you said, I think today President Trump is trying to do whatever he can to speed up this process and making sure that Qatar, who is, of course, involved with Hamas at some point in different capacities, will finally help this deal also get over the finish line.
Now, what are you hearing in terms of who is responsible for these obstacles when it comes to the hostage for ceasefire negotiations? We've heard that Israel has offered many different proposals and that Hamas has, in fact, rejected. And then today, we've also heard reports that, in fact, it's the IDF's withdrawal plan that is the obstacle point. We've even heard Hamas blame the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is delivering millions of meals to Gazans on the ground as an obstacle to moving forward in this attempt at a ceasefire. What are you hearing?
Right. Those two concessions are the ones that remain. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, we've understood for weeks now that Hamas does not like this mechanism. In fact, they've actually been asking for the United Nations to return back to their old mechanism of distributing aid into the region. And Israel has consistently said, and the reason why they stopped distributing aid into Gaza was because Hamas was controlling the aid and therefore continuing to control the population that is inside of the Gaza Strip. So, of course, it's important for us to follow that. That's one concession, but also what the IDF deployment and redeployment could look like during the 60-day ceasefire and after the ceasefire as well.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Shosh Bedrosian, ILTV correspondent, for your updates from the field. And, of course, our military correspondent, David Matlin, for the updates on Syria and Gaza. Certainly a busy day here in Israel.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right, and there you have it. Those are the top headlines from Israel that we have for this hour. Be sure to join us in the next hour as we bring you all of the latest updates from the rapidly developing situation on the ground in Syria, the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip, and everywhere else that Israel is defending itself. I'm Emily Schrader. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you very soon.